talking about cesspools. My name is Sina Kruger. I'm the engineering program manager for the wastewater branch, which is part of again, I'm Senior Coordinator with the Department of Health Wastewater Branch. And before I wanted to start the meeting, I just wanted to actually thank Representative Richard Onishi for helping us, set up today's meeting with this conference room. And also want to thank the Hilo staff that was also involved with this meeting. To get started, I'm going to be, we're going to be talking about cesspools, and I just want to introduce my team first before we get started. So the first person I would like to introduce is Ted Bowen. He's our Deputy Attorney General that supports our water programs in DOH. The next person is Joanna Sato. She's a program manager that leads our safe drinking water program. They regulate the drinking water systems and they administer the drinking water state revolving loan fund. The next person is Mr. Alec Wong. He is the program manager for the Clean Water Branch. That is part of our Department of Health. The next person is Dan Chang, and he's an environmental health specialist that works for the Safe Drinking Water Branch. And then we have Miles Nishioka. He's our cesspool coordinator that works for the wastewater branch. And we have Dr. Tracy Wagner. She's the professor in Marine Science Department for the University of Hawaii, Hilo. So getting back to cesspools. Cesspools have impacted the quality of drinking water, general water quality, and the health of our reefs, and the health of Hawaii's residents and visitors. During the 2017 regular legislation session, Act 125 was passed, and this law actually required the replacement of all cesspools by 2050. So 2050, that's 32 years from now. So, residents will be given 32 years to figure out financing, which the Department of Health, will be working with other stakeholders to see if there can be like financial mechanisms that can be available for these upgrades. And part of that act, the legislature actually required the Department of Health to do a prioritization, of cesspool upgrades in the state. And from that report, the Department of Health actually identified 14 areas that required upgrade. And it was separate, it was categorized as priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3 areas. Priority 4 were cesspools, and that was roughly about half. We have like 88,000 cesspools, so about 48,000 cesspools were prioritized in priority categories 1, 2, and 3. The other half you still have to evaluate and analyze. So for part of the 13 areas, there's actually 2 areas on the Big Island that we're going to talk about today in more in detail. And those are cesspools in Hilo and KL. But we are going to get back to that. But before we do, what we're going to do is talk about what is a cesspool. I'm not sure if a lot of you know what a cesspool is, but Basically, a cesspool is just nothing but a hole in the ground. Cesspools discharge raw, untreated human waste into the soil. Cesspools can contaminate groundwater, drinking water, and our ocean. It presents risks to human health and to the environment. And it contains high concentrations of nitrogen, phosphorus, and fecal coliform bacteria other than cesspools, septic tank systems. So this is actually a diagram of how a cesspool is. So usually, so a cesspool is, again, it's just but it's usually made like with concrete cylinders, and you just have your wastewater entering, and it usually either seeps down to the open bottom or it seeps to the sides. So that's just your raw wastewater just going down a cesspool. There's kind of like no treatment. It just goes into this hole. And this is how cesspools usually contaminate your groundwater. So usually if it seeps down to the bottom, and depending on the depth to groundwater, so the closer you are to the ocean, or if you're close to a stream, groundwater is usually high. So a lot of times there are a lot of cesspools that are actually in the groundwater, so there is a direct discharge. And what the groundwater does is if you have your sewage entering the cesspool, it enters groundwater, and what the groundwater does is it acts like a conduit. So it takes it, and in the groundwater, it'll either flow to the ocean or to a drinking water source. So this is just a diagram of how you have a cesspool and how you have the ground, it enters groundwater, and in this example, it hits the groundwater and then it enters a lake or river or ocean. And this is a septic tank system. So a septic tank system actually has a tank, and it has on the bottom a perforated drain field, where after it gets settled in a septic tank. So septic tank actually kind of separates your solids, and a lot of times you have like your grease actually in the septic tank floating, so and your heavy solids settles to the bottom of the tank, and you have like an effluent, settled effluent entering your leach field, and it's dispersed, in a leach field, and usually the soil in a leach field will act like as a treatment for your wastewater. So, as I said, we had Act 125, where they asked the Department of Health to prioritize the cesspools, and what it did was the report, it had an overview where it identified that the cesspools were a major source of contamination and water pollution in Hawaii. It also identified that there's 88,000 cesspools statewide. Half of them are actually located on this island. There's about 49,000 cesspools. And out of the 88,000 cesspools, it discharges roughly 53 million gallons per day of raw wastewater. The report identified 13 areas, actually it was 14 areas in the state that were priorities for cesspool upgrades, and 43,000 of these cesspools were located in the 13 areas. The reason why I said that there were originally 14 areas is because Kapoho was actually one of the areas that were identified in the report, and because of the lava and we're not sure how much of it was covered, so that's why we took it and we changed it from 32. What is that, from 14 to 13? So we're going to have Ted Bowen talk about the priorities and the report.
Thank you, Sina, and thank all of you for coming tonight. Appreciate you turning out and showing some interest in this issue. We have two basic purposes in being here tonight. One is to impart some information about this and explain what the nature of the problem is with cesspools and why it's a concern for the state of Hawaii and for the island of Hawaii. The other is to get your opinions on it. We'll have some opportunity for questions after we present some information, and we really want to know what you all think about this problem. The legislature has called for the upgrading of all cesspools by 2050, which is 32 years from now. So we're not facing an urgency in terms of action, but we are facing a serious impact on groundwater. And so it is important that people begin to get their, begin to understand the problem and begin to figure out what to do about it. It will be very expensive to replace cesspools. And so there's the financial issues about this too. People don't have the kind of money necessarily in their pockets that it takes to upgrade a cesspool. So one of the things that we want to do moving forward is to figure out the best financial mechanisms to resolve some of these problems. Another is to study the technologies, because there is sewering in some areas. If you're close to a sewer, it makes sense. You're never going to sewer the whole big island. It's too big, and the density is not there. So some places are certainly going to have individual wastewater systems rather than a centralized sewer. You have pocket sewers, but mostly you're going to have individual wastewater systems. As Sina mentioned, there are 88,000 cesspools on the island, and so it's a lot of people. It's a lot of waste that's being injected down into our groundwater, and that's not a good thing. Either in terms of drinking water some places, or in terms of sensitive surface waters. As Sina said, my job is to, first here is to describe the prioritization system. What the Department of Health did with its scientists working with the University of Hawaii in Manoa was to, and Hilo, I think too, was to collect data and determine the areas that had the greatest density of cesspools and what impacts they had on waters. So we looked at the areas that had a lot of cesspools and where they were concentrated. We hooked those up with the information on in some cases on surface waters. And we also looked at where there were drinking water wells to determine if there were problems. There don't seem to be any drinking water well problems, public drinking water systems that are impacted by cesspools on this island, at least not that I know about. There are some places in Keau that have a lot of cesspools where people are putting in drinking water wells, individual private wells. And that's not a good thing. So they might have some impacts. We haven't documented that, but it's an area of concern. As we said, the slides. The first priority areas that the department developed were areas that appear to have some impact on human health, and it's been documented with testing in the field on either human health or impacts on surface waters. So those areas are priority one. They're not on this island, but there are areas where we discovered an actual impact in terms of nitrates that are measured from the wastewater. The second priority is areas that have a potential of impacting drinking water, because you don't want to be drinking wastewater. And so areas that appear to have drinking water wells that may be impacted by cesspools are an area of concern. The third area is third priority area, and it's not necessarily a lesser priority, but just priority 3 is areas where cesspools appear to have an impact on surface waters. And this can affect where people swim, so that's going to be a health impact too. It also can affect the corals that we depend on. Healthy corals are so important for preserving our way of life and our shoreline. So this is a serious matter as well. Fourth priority area is, as Sina mentioned, I think a little bit already, it's really a catch-all for cesspools that have not been categorized into one of these three areas yet. So some of them might also become higher priorities. In the last session of the legislature, first of all, in 2017, the legislature asked the department to do a report on prioritization. And the department did that in December. And that is the source of the priorities that I've just mentioned. And they're maps that show where the cesspools are and where we think there are problems. In this legislative session, the legislature passed a bill, Brown Act 132, I think, that would set up a working group with people who are expert from University of Hawaii, people from the Department of Health, people from even from banks and real estate. We want to get sort of a broad input of opinion as to what we need to do about the cesspool problem. Because, as I mentioned, this is a very expensive problem for the state of Hawaii and a very important environmental problem that needs to be fixed. We don't want to rush into it, so we're first studying it to figure out both the best technological solution, what's out there in terms of the best way to upgrade cesspools. And I would say that that is not a matter of one size fits all. It's also true that we don't have all the answers yet. So we want to get expert opinion on this, we want to study it, we want to figure out what makes sense before we move ahead. The other big area for work is to look at the financing aspects, because as I said, it's expensive. So with this working group, we will also be looking at some of those issues, and that's why it's important to have the banks and the realtors and people like that in to give us some opinion. So that's what I had to say initially. If you have some questions later, maybe I can help. Particularly if you have any legal questions, I'm the person to talk to about that. Well, my client's the Department of Health, I'm not going to give you legal advice, but I could answer some questions about the way the law works. So with that, I'll turn it back to Sina, and thank you again for coming.
So the next person that's going to talk about the two areas of Hilo and Keao is Joanne.
Good evening. So Keao, as you could see from the previous slides, is a priority 2 area with 9,300 cesspools. This area of Puna is not served by public water, and instead many residents rely on private drinking water wells for their domestic water needs. Unfortunately, Keao also lacks soil to mitigate the slow drainage of cesspool effluent, as Sina had shown in the previous slides. So the high concentration of 9,300 cesspools pose a significant health risk. A DOH investigation from the Safe Drinking Water Branch found that 25% of domestic wells sampled produced positive results for wastewater indicator bacteria. That just demonstrates the potential for disease transmission. So that's on this map. Those are the drinking water wells in that area. Hilo Bay is a priority 3 area with 8,700 cesspools. Heavy rainfall upslope of Hilo Bay results in significant amounts of stream and groundwater discharge to Hilo Bay. As we'll see in Tracy's presentation, there have been measured sewage-related bacterial concentrations in Hilo Bay. At this time, Dr. Wigner will discuss her work in more detail.
Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you Department of Health for inviting me to this information session. So before I share some of our data for Hilo Bay, I'd like to first talk to you a little bit about what sewage pollution is, and then show you what we know currently about where we live. So what is sewage? It's really a nasty cocktail of hundreds of different compounds, including things like urine. It also includes pathogens like viruses, bacteria, and protozoa. It also includes nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus that can cause plants to grow. Heavy metals, pharmaceuticals, solids like feces, hydrocarbons, cleaning chemicals, toxins, and fresh water. It's pretty much everything that you put down your sink and toilet. That is what comprises sewage. So how does sewage get to the ocean? Well, when we're talking about on-site sewage disposal systems, like cesspools, septic tanks, aerobic treatment units, or even sewage injection wells that some sewage treatment plants have, the sewage enters into the groundwater and then travels to the ocean. So how fast does the sewage reach the ocean? And how do we know this? Well, we've done dye tracer studies, and this is the collective we, where we put fluorescent dye into, say, a cesspool and look for it to emerge along the shoreline where there are groundwater springs. In some places, it can travel relatively fast. A study about 40 years ago at Kapoho found that it made it to the pools in about 20 minutes. It can also range from hours to day, which is what we've detected at Puko over the last several years. And then in some cases, it can take months to reach the shoreline with regards to the sewage injection well in Lahaina, Maui. What this shows us is that cesspool systems are an immediate human and ecosystem health threat, that sewage is reaching the shoreline on relatively short timescales. So what does this mean if you swim or you drink sewage-contaminated water? Well, depending on the concentration of the pollution, you could get really sick. The most common one people talk about is gastroenteritis, which is really bad vomiting and diarrhea. You can also get things like typhoid fever. And unfortunately, not too infrequently, our beaches are closed due to sewage pollution. In fact, I think even this morning I heard about sewage pollution occurring on Oahu. We also have it here in the Big Island where drinking water wells, these are private wells, have been shown to be contaminated with sewage, where there are cesspools, Pinalka draining downstream into drinking water wells near the ocean. And you can see that here. This is a figure from a Department of Health report. And you can see this is for Hawaiian Paradise Park. You can see that the total coliform, which is a fecal indicator bacteria, that its concentrations increase as you get closer to the ocean. So what's your risk of getting sick if you go swimming in sewage-contaminated waters? The way that we assess this is looking at fecal indicator bacteria, and for marine recreational waters, we use Enterococcus. And the standard is 35 colony-forming units per 100 ml. This is a geometric mean, which means you have to collect a certain number of samples over a certain time period. And that mean should not exceed that value. So if you went swimming and the Enterococcus concentrations are at that level, your chance of getting gastroenteritis are about 3.6%. There have also been other health risk assessments using some newer techniques. One is bacteroides, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, at a certain level, your chance of getting gastroenteritis if you were to go swimming in those waters is about 3%. So far I've talked about how sewage pollution can impact human health, but sewage pollution is also a threat to our coastal ecosystems. As I mentioned before, sewage pollution can have high nutrient concentrations, and this can result in another environmental problem known as eutrophication, where we have high nutrient concentrations resulting in algal blooms. This can be phytoplankton, where your water can turn to pea soup, or it can be seaweed blooms, where you can go from a coral-dominated system to one that's covered with seaweed. In addition, sewage pollution can result in declines in coral and fish abundance. It can also result in increased prevalence and severity of coral and reef biota disease and infection. In addition to sewage pollution issues in Hawaii, Hawaii has a high prevalence of waterborne skin and gastroenteritis infections. In fact, many of these pathogens are found in our streams and coastal waters. And in fact, one of the ones that tends to be a high percentage of the skin infections is Staphylococcus aureus. And this bacteria has saltwater tolerant and antibiotic resistant strains. The one most commonly people talk about is MRSA. And in Hawaii, we have the highest rate of community-acquired staph infections. So these are infections that are obtained out and about in the community and not in a hospital setting. And Hawaii State has the highest community-acquired MRSA infections in the nation. It's 2 times the national average. Now, some of these pathogens are also found in wastewater. MRSA has been found in wastewater in the United States and in Europe, as well as in Hawaii. And a recent study on Oahu found that salmonella, which is another pathogen you can find in sewage that can make you sick, that its abundance in sewage in the wastewater treatment plant correlated with the number of cases coming into the clinical settings, and many of the strains in the environment were similar to the ones that people presented with. So we might have 2 problems that are interrelated. We might have too much sewage coming into our coastal waters, which may in part be resulting into people getting sick. So going a little bit closer to home on our island, most of the wastewater is disposed of through cesspools. And statewide, we have about 90,000 cesspools, with about 50,000 on our island. As mentioned before, cesspools are essentially holes in the ground where raw wastewater goes in, and then will enter into the groundwater table and eventually make its way to the ocean. Hawaii State uses cesspools as the way to dispose of domestic wastewater. It's more common here than in any other state in the nation. But luckily, in the fall of 2016, the state passed a ban for the construction of new cesspools. We are the last state in the nation to do so, and following Rhode Island, which was in 1968. So we're a little bit behind the curve, but hopefully we're heading in the right direction. So even closer to home, going to Hilo, we have almost 9,000 cesspools within our town. We have a high density of about 41 cesspools per square mile. It's the second highest on our island, followed by Ka'au. This density is thought to be likely to contaminate groundwater based on US EPA studies. So how much raw sewage is coming into Hilo Bay from the cesspools? It's estimated to be about 5.6 million gallons per day. Now, that number doesn't really mean much to me, so I wanted to put it in terms of something that we could relate to. So it's approximately equal to the volume of 8.5 Olympic-sized pools. That's the amount of raw sewage coming into Hilo Bay from cesspools every day. That's about 0.4% volume of the bay. And again, to put this into terms that you can relate to, it's like sitting in your bathtub full of water and you're eating. So what do we know about Hilo Bay's water quality with regard to sewage pollution? Well, Hilo Bay has been on the US EPA's 303D list of impaired water since the 1970s for its high level of fecal indicator bacteria. And it is thought that we have this high level of bacteria because only a small portion of our town is actually sewered. 60 to 70% of the town uses cesspools. That means only 30% are connected to the sewage treatment plant. Now we're here today because the community, the county, the state, the federal government all want to reduce the amount of sewage pollution going into our coastal waters to decrease our threat of becoming sick and to protect our coastal ecosystems. But what's really limited us over the years in getting us to this point is financial resources and also limited data. And so Hilo Bay has currently been designated as a priority 3 for cesspool removal due to its high rain, high cesspool density, high number of cesspools, and that rain makes it very easy for the sewage in the cesspools to get into the groundwater and to reach the bay. So what do we know about sewage indicators in Hilo Bay? I'd like to first talk about Enterococcus. This is the fecal indicator used by the Hawaii Department of Health to assess safe swimming water conditions. The bacteria itself is not pathogenic, it won't make you sick. It's found in our gut, but it's an easy bacteria to measure, and it's associated with other pathogens that come out in sewage that are much harder to measure. And so we have set standards for this. As I mentioned before, we don't want the concentrations, the average, to exceed 35 colony forming units per 100 mils. Otherwise, you have an increasing chance of catching gastroenteritis if you were to go in the water. So looking at Enterococcus, we've measured it at several different stations inside of Hilo Bay, and this is inside the breakwater. And we've gone out when it was dry and when it was raining. And what we found was that Enterococcus concentrations were similar in all the different regions where we've made the measurements. But it does differ between dry and stormy conditions. During dry conditions, the average concentration is about 100 colony forming units per 100 mil. But during storms, it increases by an order of magnitude and can go up to about 1,000, or in some cases we've seen 8,000. So as I said before, the other thing is that in general, the concentrations don't exceed the Hawaii Department of standard single sample maximum, or now it's called the statistical threshold, except for when it's storming. So during the dry conditions, usually we're below the standard, except at the river mouths, and then following storms, the concentrations go above that standard. Now, because Enterococcus is naturally found in tropical soils, the Hawaii Department of Health measures a secondary fecal indicator bacteria, Clostridium perfringens. This bacteria is thought to be more specific to human waste, as it's only found in warm-blooded animals like ourselves. It's also an anaerobic bacteria, so it doesn't multiply in the environment, and it's thought that its concentration levels more represent the sewage pollution levels. So what we found here is that in general, the spatial variability varied between different regions in the bay, but we typically had higher concentrations at the river mouths, and concentrations also increased during the storm. Most of the time, concentration levels were not above the standard recommended to the Department of Health of 5, except during the storms and a few of the river mouths. Now, it's important to know the concentration of these bacteria because that gives us a sense of the health risk if you were to go swimming. But it's also important to know where the bacteria are coming from. Are they from humans or other animals in the watershed? And what's that geographic location? So if we wanted to reduce the pollution, we know where to go in and to make management recommendations and to implement those actions. So to gain this information, the first thing we did was we looked at the bacteria Bacteroides. This is the most abundant one in your gut. And there are molecular probes that allow us to distinguish human Bacteroides from Bacteroides from other animals. And what we found is that 40 to over 50% of our samples that we collected in Hilo Bay, and this was over 200 samples, these tested positive for human Bacteroides. We only had positive hits during storms, and we had the most positive hits at the river mouths. Now, the other thing, as I mentioned before, so you need to know the source. And then you need to know where the hot spots are, so if you wanted to take management actions, you know where to focus first. And so we worked on creating maps for these two different fecal indicator bacteria. So the first map I want to show you is for Enterococcus. And we have both maps for high flow conditions, so during the storms, and then low river flow conditions when it's dry. And what we found is that the Enterococcus is coming in with the river water, and we have high concentrations immediately following the storms. And you can see from the high river flow map that the water gets trapped behind the breakwall, but eventually will dilute out over the course of a day to 3 following the storm. We also wanted to see how well our maps predicted exceedances, so exceeding the state standards. For Enterococcus, our map was accurate about 64% time in predicting exceedances. We also made a map for Clostridium perfringens, and like Enterococcus, it comes in with the river water during storms, and you can see here on the high river flow map, again, that it gets trapped behind the breakwater, but eventually dilutes out as the storm dissipates and water from the bay flows out. For this map, it had a better prediction for exceedances, and was able to predict exceedances 95% of the time. Now, one of the things that we're working on, so it's a work in progress, is we want to develop a nowcast. It's like a forecast, but it tells you what the conditions are like now. And we want to do that. We want to predict what the fecal indicator bacteria concentrations will be at the bay at any given time, in real time, using parameters measured off of the water quality buoy in Hilo Bay. And using relationships between what the buoy measures and the bacteria, you should be able to make real-time predictions about what the bacteria concentrations are. And that information can be available to community members so that they can decide on whether they're comfortable with the risk of going swimming on certain days and under different conditions. So like I said before, this is a work in progress. We've been looking for funding for this project over the last several years, but I haven't given up. But hopefully with the development of a model like this, we'll be able to decrease health risks to water users and hopefully the number of waterborne infections. So just to summarize, fecal indicator bacteria are highest near the river mouths in Hilo Bay, so that's Wailuku and Wailoa, and our concentrations are highest during storms. For Enterococcus, which is the main fecal indicator bacteria used to assess safe swimming conditions, the concentrations were 10 times higher during the storm, or 10 times higher than the standard during the storms. More than 40% of our samples tested positive for human feces during the storms. Our maps were able to help us visualize where the hot spots are in the bay. This is important for when you want to do management decisions and also warning people about places where they could potentially be more likely to get sick than others. And then lastly, we are trying to develop tools to make real-time predictions so that community members can decide for themselves whether they're comfortable going swimming under certain conditions at different locations. So I want to say mahalo to all the people who've been involved in this project over the years and the numerous funding sources that have made this possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker, for that great presentation. So at this point, we're at the stage where we're gonna do questions and answers. So if you guys have any questions at this time, please raise your hand.
Somebody wants to drill a well, they have to get a permit, right? Thanks.
Yeah, I had a question about where wells are allowed to be drilled and what's the relationship with the underground injection control line?
So Joanna will answer that question because the UIC Underground Injection Control Program is under her branch.
Thank you. So your question is, where can you drill a well? Is this for disposal or for drinking?
For drinking.
Okay. So for drinking water wells, the UIC line is identifying where we believe the drinking water aquifers to be located. And so anything that is inland of the line is considered to be a drinking water aquifer. So we would be able to drill there, but we would regulate anybody who has 25 customers 60 days of the year or 15 service connections. Anybody who has less than that, we do not regulate that drinking water well. Therefore, you have drinking water wells in the Ke'au area for the single-family homeowners. as far as knowing what the quality of the water is after you've drilled your well, we have a list of parameters on our website that you can do the test for, and then you can compare it to our maximum contaminant levels that we actually do regulate for.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you for that shocking and nauseating presentation. Who doesn't like to swim and who doesn't like to drink safe water? You know, it's very disturbing. I'm wondering about posting at Coconut Island and Reed's Bay. Is there any kind of signs posting the possible potential hazards of swallowing the water, swimming in the water, people with compromised immune systems, younger children, older people who are vulnerable to bacterial invasions, as well as and I'm wondering about Carl Smith and Richardson's, if there's any kind of testing there with beach parks.
Maybe, I'm not too sure whether we have any testing or sampling station in the Coconut Island. But I think if you can tell me, you told us already the water was kind of stagnant, not clear, and definitely, probably you will see high count of fecal bacteria in that area. And if that's the case, I think I recommend, don't recreate it in those areas. Right? If you see the water is dirty, just don't go in, because it's possible they have high count. And normally, we cannot be tested everywhere. Right? So that's why when our sampling stations only focus on those highly recreated areas, such as maybe they have lifeguard, that kind of beach area, and then we will sample it maybe once a week. And other areas may be sampled once a month, and some other highly not populated use area, we may be sampled once a week, that kind of frequencies.
So you're saying that the beach parks are sampled once a week?
Depending on whether they have recreational uses. Right. If those beach parks, they have lifeguard in those beach parks, probably we will sample once a week.
Once a week.
Right.
What if can you address the issue about posting notices about contaminated water in Coconut Island and Reed's Bay? I mean, kids they're going to look at the water and say, oh, it's not clear, or it is clear, and I mean, that's kind of like not very definitive.
But like I say, I'm not too sure whether Coconut Island, that area, are we sampling once a week or not. But if we, sampling those areas that are exceeding the water quality standard, in this case it's 130 CFU or 100 mil of enterococcus, we will go inside. I think that's why earlier, you heard Dr. Brennan talk about, we coincide in on the middle, we coincide. I think right now we still have some coincides in Kauai and Maui. Anytime when we test the water, if they exceeding the criteria of 130, and then we will coincide until the enterococcus testing result back to normal or below 130. Then we will remove the signpost. As a matter of fact, you can sign up with our, go to our website, you can subscribe with all this testing result. Once you get high count, we will be notified, and then we will know which area with the high count of bacteria.
Okay, last comment I want to make. Given the substrate here it's just lava and it's expensive to run sewer lines underneath underground, so to have a central sewage system eventually in 32 years or before that. That's very expensive, and so I'd like to advocate for biodigester toilets. Toilets like composting toilets that don't take pipes that transfer the sewage to a central plant. Composting toilets and biodigester toilets are very environmentally sane and inexpensive option for you to consider and the public to consider too.
Okay, we'll consider that. One of the things with compost toilets that we have experienced is that, I mean, you would have to want to use compost toilets because it requires like a lot of maintenance, and if you don't maintain it with that carbon source, it creates odors. With a compost toilet, you still would need a gray water system, and our regulations would have to change because right now kitchen water is actually considered black water. Wastewater can be categorized as a black water and a gray water component. Black water is kitchen wastewater and your toilets. Gray water is wastewater from your showers, sinks, and from your laundry. So you still would have, even if you did a compost toilet, you still would have to figure out what to do with the wastewater from the kitchen.
Yeah, I wonder if you folks are looking at ideas like requiring low flow water fixtures. That way you don't have so much water going into the system, there's less water to deal with. Also doing water recycling. So again, there's less water ending up at the sewer plant or wherever. And I want to, reinforce what he said about the waterless toilets. I have a composting toilet at home. It's not good. I should have got a different model, not my friends. But a better model, say it's basically no maintenance. And it's mine, I don't have an odor problem. So I gave you some written information. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, you did bring up good points. And I think that nowadays, if you're building new dwellings, a lot of your toilet fixtures, and your shower heads are more efficient. The problem comes in with existing structures that probably have toilets that are inefficient and shower heads that are not efficient too. And it's trying to figure out how can you give, tax credits for changing out your toilets and your fixtures so that you do generate less wastewater. But I think the Department of Water has, I'm not sure if they have tax breaks for that, but that is actually a good idea. And what we'll do too is look into the compost toilets. So can I just ask you a question? What do you usually do with so that the product that comes and is generated from compost toilets is called humus. So do you bury it or do you actually land apply it?
Mine only works. I happen to have a big backyard, so I take it and put it in a pile there, in a container, until it decomposes. But my friends with a different brand, they say you never have to do anything to it.
Yeah, just a quick question going through your methodology. I was just looking at those figures of 80-some thousand cesspools in the state releasing 55 million gallons of raw sewage per day, which sounds to me, depending on where you slice it, somewhere between 600 and 700